Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Hello.
Welcome to the second session. We'll basically pick up from where we left off last time, but quick recap before that. So, again, the approach remains the same, that none of this is settled knowledge. None of this is like, this is the only truth out there. Many opinions. This is one way of thinking. I want this to be a conversation. I want this to go back and forth. So, stop me, interrupt, ask questions. Completely fine. Disagree with me. That's great. The goal is to just get you to start thinking about what money is, how it works, and what the consequences are to us, to society in general, and stay curious and stay respectful. Last time, the way we began was we want to understand what Bitcoin is, but for that, we have to understand what money is. And for that, we have to understand why money is in the first place. And we started off with barter, which is just to exchange goods and services amongst yourselves. But when the economy becomes larger and there's too many people and too many goods and services, barter becomes more and more complicated. So society came up with a solution, which was you can start treating something as money that everyone is willing to accept in exchange for their goods and services. And the things that started off as money were things that were already in use and useful to basically everyone in society there. So it started off with food items like grains or like cows or whatever things that were productive there in society. And then slowly the abstraction began. So you moved on to like decorative items like beads and silk rolls, and there were certain properties that we realized that this money has, or good money has. Anyone would like to quickly describe what these properties are from those who attended last time? This is for the benefit of the newcomers. So someone who has already attended the last session, just quickly one sentence descriptions of all of the properties. Are you saying something, Sanjeev sir? I see your
No,
mark.
no, 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 no. I'm saying we can waive this off because there are no school kids here. There's a very simple English. Everybody can understand it also. Because these words are not very technical.
ठीक
So
है.
even if somebody is newcomer, he can understand these words very easily. Yeah.
ठीक है. Still a
Yeah.
very quick run through because there is like fungibility and everything जो लोग शायद नहीं समझते. Acceptability, of course, like people are willing to accept it. Durable is that it lasts for a long time, so people can store their economic energy, the value that they've created for a long time. Divisibility, of course, you can divide it into smaller and smaller pieces for making smaller transactions. Portability is you can carry it across space with you. So if you move to a different place, if you want to travel far and wide and transact there, you should be able to easily carry it with you. Fungibility is that you should be willing to accept someone else's money in exchange for your money with no reservations, which seems very obvious today because you all deal in like rupees or dollars or euros or whatever, mostly rupees here, I'm guessing. So it feels like, yeah, 1 rupee is 1 rupee. But when grains was money or like cows were money, so not all cows are the same. Some cows give better milk, some cows are healthier, some cows are younger. Same for grains, you have like better quality grains, worse quality grains, all of that. So fungibility became a big concern when you use commodities as money. And then scarcity. You don't want something that can just be inflated in supply easily or that was too abundantly available. You wanted something that was scarce, that was hard to produce, which created a cap on the total like supply available, which made sure that no one could game the system. Like everyone had to work hard to earn the money to then be able to like spend it, to be able to like purchase goods and services. And also it made sure that prices of things were stable enough. Although this is a benefit that we accrued much later when economies became more complex, this became more important, but we'll get to that later. Functions of good money. I missed this last time. I'll quickly cover this. So what money does for you is it acts as a store of value, of course. If you don't have something like money, you have to exhaust whatever you've created before it goes bad. So if you're a tomato producer or if you are a rice producer or if whatever you produce, if you can't convert it into money that can last for a long time, you have to consume it immediately. So store of value, it helps you store value over time. Medium of exchange, you want something from someone else, they should be willing to accept what you have. That is like basically the definition of money here, right? And unit of account. Eventually, when something starts becoming used as money in a society, everyone starts thinking in those terms. So everyone starts pricing things in those terms, and that becomes the unit with which you start accounting for everything. And that also is an important role that money plays, that it helps you keep track of like what you can afford, what you can't. We did a small exercise last time where we ranked the different kinds of money we've had on these different dimensions, and this was a bottom-up sort of exercise. People participated in it. I've already told about up to silk rolls. We had metal money like copper, nickel, aluminum, even iron, other kinds of metals. Eventually, we moved on to gold and silver because they were both more durable and more scarce. And then eventually, we had standardization of gold and silver. So they were turned into coins by kingdoms, by kings. So that was the evolution of money that we covered so far. Then we had early inflation, which was the money that we had. Governments wanted to steal your purchasing power. They wanted to just have some for themselves instead of having to earn it in the fair way, which for a government or a kingdom would be either taxation or through some economic activity. So they would either start clipping coins, like putting holes in them and removing some amounts, and then using that bits to then create money for themselves, or started lowering the purity of the coin. So instead of having like 97% silver, you'll have 95, and then 90, then 80, and then the rest of the silver you use to make coins for yourself. So these are ways in which governments inflate the supply, which means your purchasing power is diluting, your share of the economy is diluting. And the takeaways, the main takeaways from last time's session were these. These might not be obvious at first glance, but if you look at the recording from last time, it will be better. Firstly, we decided on a definition of inflation that is not what most people are used to. We think of inflation as a rise in prices over time. That is one of the ways to look at inflation, but the primary way we want you to look at inflation is the increase in the supply of money or the debasement of money. And once you identify that, once you look at that, you can come to many different conclusions using that. One is that just increasing the quantity of money, having more money, does not make you richer or does not make an economy more productive. So it does not increase your purchasing power per se. And that inflation, that increasing the supply of money, often results in your purchasing power going down, your share of the economy going down. So inflation becomes theft. Inflation is theft. And if you increase productivity in society, if your economy is producing more, that is the way to increase purchasing power of people in that economy. So if there is no theft happening, any increase in output is going to be distributed amongst the people based on how much money they have, what percentage of the economy that they own, in terms of what percentage of the money supply that they own. And that's how their purchasing power increases. It is through increase in productivity in the absence of inflation. But also, you can have inflation, you can have theft, and still have increases in purchasing power, or increase or stable purchasing power, as long as the rate of inflation stays below the rate of productivity. So economy is producing double next year, but inflation is only 50%. So you'll still be able to buy more in the market tomorrow, but it will be lesser than what you would have been able to buy had there been zero inflation. So there can be theft, and you can still feel that your money is doing well and you're getting richer and you're able to buy more, but there can still be a lot of sneaky theft. So the end conclusion was, an ideal money would be such that if you have a certain quantity of it, that would represent a fixed proportion of all the money that there is. So if you have 1 unit and there are 100 units in the world today, there will always be 100 units only, so that your 1 unit will always represent 1% of the world's output. So if the world is producing more and more, because it does, because technology makes things cheaper to produce and we are able to produce more and more things, you should be able to buy more and more with the same money. What you have today is the opposite. You have inflation, you are able to buy less and less with the same money, which is unnatural, which is the result of money printing, debasement. That was the conclusion of last session. Now we can begin today's session. Sorry for the 10-minute sort of overview for those who were there.
That's fine.
All right. This is Stein's law. It's a person called Herbert Stein. He's an economist. He was an economist, rather. He said if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And this is going to be the central theme maybe of today's session. It's going to be something we lean on again and again. It's going to come and rescue us in hard times. It's going to light the way. So I thought I should put it on the first slide itself. Just remember this, it'll come back. It sounds obvious, but it's easy to forget that. So we were already there last time that kingdoms introduced standardizations of gold and of silver in the name of like uniform weight and uniform purity and like being able to trust. But the thing that they actually did was they started cheating. They started playing around with the weight. They started playing around with the purity, and slowly they lost that trust. But apart from that, also there were limitations of using gold and silver as money, like using gold and silver coins as money, especially as economy started to advance and grow and trade started to expand even further. Would someone like to guess what limitations could having coins as money be, whether they're gold, silver, or whether something else?
Sanjeev, sir, you're on mute.
Pardon?
Sanjeev, sir, is on mute. He's trying to say something, but he's on mute.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. I said because there is a limitation of supply in gold and silver. It cannot be unlimited supply. The way we manage currently, the printing of money is there in the world, but that kind of thing cannot happen because there is a slip. There will be some limitation about gold and silver supply. That's why.
Why is that a bad thing?
No, it's not. I'm not saying bad or good, but there is a limitation of gold and silver coin was because of perhaps it was due to that. Perhaps.
Okay, so by limitation here in the slide, I meant as in ki.
Oh, I got it. I got it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I took it in a physical way. Sorry.
Yeah. Something
Sorry.
that prevented gold and silver
Yeah,
from.
I'm sorry. I took it in a physical way. Sorry.
Would you like to then propose something else as what the limitations of using gold or silver as money could be? Gold or silver coins? Darpan wants to say something.
It is difficult to carry around.
Definitely. Big problem. It's heavy. If you want to make a big transaction, especially, you have to carry a lot around. But that also introduces risks to your safety, to the safety of the money. So it is very obvious when you have something like a coin as money and you're carrying a lot of it with you for a big, like you're buying a land somewhere or something, you're now exposed to theft because the amount of money is proportional to the value of money because it's based on the weight.
Storage will be the problem.
Pardon?
Storage.
Storage
Gold
is
and
also a
silver-
problem.
Yes.
That's correct. If you have a lot of money, you will need a lot of storage space. And again, you will need a lot of security for that storage space.
Yeah.
You don't need to raise your hands, guys. Just speak up. Bapat had
It's
something.
also centrally controlled, right? There's a lot of power in the kingdom to control the supply or even be able to hoard all the coins. Or yeah.
That is true. That was a problem. But
And one more thing, if everyone having more gold coins and silver coins, government can make as a demonetization also. Just a thinking.
demonetization of what? Of gold or silver?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Just thinking if everyone has the same amount of gold and silver.
I mean, so in a way, the introduction of alternative forms of money, like paper money, and I'm skipping ahead now, but this is to address what you said. It's a form of, like today, you don't use gold for transactions. You use rupees for transactions. That's a form of demonetization of gold, right?
True. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Like directionally, you're in the right place. So
But Digvijay, one thing was there. Good old days, the amount of money supply was directly in proportion to the gold held by the central bank, which was discontinued in 1972 onwards in US, and later on other countries also followed the suit. So,
we'll get there, sir. That's this session.
so in a way,
We'll get there. We'll get there. But so far, what we've managed to cover is that there was a lack of trust for sure, because kingdoms kept like diluting and playing other tricks with it. So there was a verification layer that was added on top, especially when you're trading across kingdoms. As I said, as the world economy started trading more and more, they found it difficult to agree to accept each other's coins unless there was some king who was known ki "Arey, ye wala to ekdam purity wala deta hai." Like there were some people who developed that reputation, but mostly there was a bit of friction involved. Divisibility became a challenge actually. So because gold and silver gained so much in value as the economy expanded, if you want to go and buy one apple in the market, the amount of gold you would pay for it would be so small that eventually you had to adopt different metals, cheaper metals, so to speak, like copper, like nickel, like other metals, for smaller transactions. And what that meant was it introduced a lot of complexity, because now you have two different metals acting as money in the same society. Their relative supplies, their change in supply over the years are affecting their relative valuations and hence their pricing to everything else. It's like having a two currency system where the exchange rate between the currencies also keeps changing. So now it's just too complicated for people to keep track, and it's not an ideal solution. And of course, as Sagar and others have mentioned, portability, Darpan mentioned, portability was a problem, theft and safety was a problem. So what could be a solution to this, to the problems that we
And
discussed
one more
here?
thing, Digvijay, one more thing on the gold, we don't know how much supply is there in the earth crust. For example, now in the world it may be some 1,000 tons. Tomorrow in the crust we can get another 1,000 tons. So the value will decrease half of that one. So the unlimited supply can say in one word.
True. We also covered this in the last session, that there is no absolute scarcity in the real world. You can always find more deposits. You can find a comet, a moon, a planet that is made of gold. And then suddenly you have gold price tanking because the supply has shot up. So scarcity is not real in the real world. It is only temporarily constrained in some way or another.
True.
So yeah, solution to these problems. If you were living back then, what could you come up with that would maybe fix some of these problems?
Metal-backed currency.
Precisely. Metal-backed currency. And by currency, I'm guessing, Darpan, you mean paper money.
Paper. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the solution that was come up with. And the first example of that we know of at least is from 11th century China. So in the Song dynasty, and this was a private form of money, by the way. Merchants, I mean, the iron was the form of coin that was used there. And merchants decided that it's just too heavy to like carry around iron and use that for trading all the time. So they came up with a private form of paper money that was a claim on iron money itself. So there is some bank of some sort that keeps the iron and that issues the paper money against it. So you go to the bank, you deposit the iron, you get some paper, and that paper is proof that there is iron in the bank. You can go to the bank at any time and you can get the iron back. And that paper started circulating as money. It gained acceptability slowly. Eventually, it got co-opted by the kingdom there, started being called Jiaozi or something, and it happened. Like what happened to it is a story that will keep repeating, so I won't say it now. But eventually, the kingdom managed to destroy the beauty of the solution that people came up with. But what's interesting about this was this is what is called a gold standard. So you're not using, I mean, it's not technically a gold standard, it's an iron standard. But the general phrasing of this, I'm going to use it again and again. So what I mean by a gold standard or a silver standard or an iron standard is that you have a form of money that acts as an abstraction on top of the actual gold or silver or iron. So you don't use the physical metal itself, you use an abstraction, in this case, paper. Moving on, after this experiment, surprisingly, so that was like 10th, 11th century China, for many, many centuries, we had just commodity money directly, like metals as money for the most part. And then in 17th century Europe, we had paper money again. And this time, it was goldsmiths. And this time it was more related to the concerns that I think Darpan had mentioned and even Sagar had mentioned, that there is safety concern. So this became a huge concern for people, that they have to keep all the gold with themselves and then they have to carry it and transact and everything. So they started giving it to goldsmiths, trusted goldsmiths, who would keep it and then issue paper receipts against them. And again, those paper receipts gained circulation and acceptance. And this was again a form of private money. This was not the government issuing this. These were private individuals who managed to gain trust over time. And this was also a gold standard. You could go to the bank, you could deposit your paper, and you can get the gold back. The paper acted as an abstraction. Now, if you're such a goldsmith and you're running such a bank, what is the temptation? How would you cheat the system?
Issue more than you have.
Who was that?
This is me.
Sandeep.
Sandeep, yes.
So yeah, you issue more paper than you have gold.
Correct.
No one
Correct.
can check the vault.
Correct. Correct. No one is coming in to check how much gold actually is, how much paper has actually been issued. It's actually very hard to even keep track of how much paper has been issued because it's just floating around. So the original sin here, so to speak, is that goldsmiths realized that not everyone is coming to their banks to withdraw the gold all at once. So if there's like 100 kg of gold deposit and 100 kgs worth of certificates issued, at any point in time, there's like maybe 8 or 10 kgs of gold in demand by people who deposited in. Apart from that, the 95 kgs is just lying in the bank the whole time. So what they realized is they can issue more receipts against the same amount of gold and issue it as debt to entrepreneurs, to businessmen, to whoever wants that money, and then charge an interest on top. So they can earn money by just issuing more of that paper against a limited amount of gold. So they came up with what came to be known as fractional reserve banking. This is how banking also works today, although it's much worse today because there is no explicit gold backing left. But today when you deposit your money to the bank, that money becomes part of the reserve, so to speak. Like, it's technically not right actually, but so to speak, like the deposits become sort of a reserve against which there's about a lot of like lending that happens on top. So this is still a gold standard. This is still a case where technically you can go to the bank at any point and you can ask for your money back, but they're not sticking to a one-on-one match to the amount of gold and the amount of claims on gold. Now, what's the problem with that? What do you think can go wrong with a fractional reserve banking system?
If everyone starts taking the amount back, then it becomes very tedious.
Exactly. This is what is called a bank run. If everyone decides for some reason, let's say I'm a competitor bank and I spread panic in the market that, hey, this guy who you've deposited your gold to, he actually doesn't have the gold. If you don't believe me, go and check. And enough people start to doubt if what I'm saying is right, and they all go to check. This guy has issued more paper than there is gold to back it with. So eventually he will run out of gold and there'll still be a lot of people left with paper. Classic bank run. And this is what happened many times over history with many different institutions, many different banks. Because you have more claims on the asset than there is the asset itself. Whenever you have a bank run, banks go bankrupt, they are insolvent, they can't pay their customers, and this kept happening. So let's go back to this exercise that we used to play, where we'll make it quick this time because today there's a lot to cover. But if we have to rank paper money on these qualities, how would we rank them? And this is completely bottom up, so you guys have to tell me what to do. We'll start with acceptability. If you're living in those times in 17th, 18th century Europe, how acceptable would it be for you to take paper in exchange for your goods and services?
I think very acceptable as long as I can exchange it for goods and services.
Okay. That's fair. So we will have to exit the presentation to actually make this change, but okay, we will do this. Acceptability gets a green. What about durability?
Yeah.
But it's just paper. It can go bad. It can burn. You can sort of be exposed to the elements, water, wind, whatever.
Yeah, not very durable.
Yeah. But at the same time, you can always go back to the bank and be like, okay, issue me a fresh note, just take this and issue me a fresh one. So you can sort of argue around it, but it's still like fairly durable, but that's fine. Divisibility.
Yeah. That is very good.
Yes, because now when it comes down to currency, you can issue it as fine as is needed in society. So the divisibility goes up. Portability.
Again, very convenient. Yes.
Yeah, because earlier, if you wanted to transact with a kilogram of gold, you had to carry the kilogram. Now you will have a kilogram of gold in a note that weighs nothing, basically. So it's now suddenly a lot more portable. Fungibility.
The standard, so it's okay. Since it has been issued by a reliable, yes, trustworthy bank, it is acceptable.
So it
Across
depends.
Europe, full Europe. It's not just one country.
Because this was a system of private banks, right?
Yeah.
What happened was there were some with better reputations than others. So the market rate of the note, of the currency note of any bank varied from what the stated rate was. And the market rate of some banks was basically at par, while other banks traded at a discount. So it was not perfectly fungible, but people came up with understandings of how acceptable certain things were. So I would not say it was like perfect, but it was slightly, it was there, it was close. What about scarcity?
Yeah,
No,
it
okay.
doesn't have unlimited supply. Yes. Directly in proportion to the gold.
But they were gaming the system. They were
Yes.
issuing more.
Yeah, in a reserve banking setup, it's not very scarce.
Yeah, so scarcity also, I'm putting yellow for certain things, but it would actually be closer to green, but just to indicate that there were problems.
Mm.
Like there were some problems that were not fixed quite as much as they would have liked to with this paper money system. And then there were a couple of inventions that changed the game entirely. Do you know what this is?
Some sort of communication device or radio or something. What is that?
The signal. Yeah.
Bang on, bang on. This is
Yes.
a telegraph.
Yes.
It is a precursor to the more well-known telephone. And these two completely changed the game because information was now traveling faster than money. Information was basically traveling instantly from anywhere in the world to anywhere else in the world that had that connectivity established. But money was still traveling at the speed at which trains or ships or horses could travel. So you now had a world where I could be sitting in New York and you could be in London, and we are businessmen and we agree on a deal, and we can do that over the phone and do it instantly. But then wait for weeks until I can send you the money and then you can send me the stuff that I want from you. Not ideal. So what's the solution? Solution is ledger money. Instead of dealing with actual paper that needs to be moved across places, you start treating money as a number in an account, in a ledger. So this double bookkeeping came up, and the industrial revolution really like supercharged this because there was a massive increase in production, in trade. There was a lot more trade volume that was happening in over longer distances. And then businesses, for them, it was a lot more convenient that they can transact at the speed at which they can communicate. So they started moving money as account entries, and banks did the settlement amongst themselves at whatever frequency that they desired or that they deemed acceptable. It could be weekly, it could be fortnightly, it could be monthly, depending on the banks, depending on the distance between them, depending on the amount of transaction happening. So banks settled in gold still, but people dealt in numbers, and this was still again a gold standard. How much actual money in numbers was floating versus the amount of gold there was questionable, of course, because now it's even easier to have higher numbers floating. There's a whole shadow banking system they came up with. It's called the euro dollar. I've been trying to study about it, but it like confuses my head, like it makes me scratch my hair out. But it came up at some point and it still exists to this point. And the size of that shadow banking network was estimated to be like, I don't remember the numbers now, but it was crazy. It was close to the size of the actual banking network, because people could just start trading, just create numbers out of thin air and just start trading using that, start treating it as value. So ledger money came in, and again, we can do a small exercise here in terms of this, but I don't think it's that necessary. It's very similar to paper money, only now that you have even more divisibility, because now you're not limited to the currency's denomination. You can go to like decimal points. It's just numbers on a ledger. Portability became crazy good, anywhere to anywhere instantly. Fungibility and everything sort of, I think fungibility even became better. But yeah, you have a sense now where the things are moving. I'll move on because there's a lot to cover today. There is a general trend. It's something I've hinted at earlier in the session today, but there's a general trend going from something like cows and grains to beads, to cloth, to metals, to decorative metals, to paper, and then to just numbers in a ledger. Money increasingly became more and more a certain thing, a certain quality. Would someone like to guess what that is? There are no wrong answers, by the way. You can just keep guessing. Okay, no volunteers. Ayush has a guess.
It become more abstract.
Correct. That's what I was looking for. It
Yeah.
became more and more abstract. It became more and more removed from the things that were directly useful to people, and it became more and more a representation of value. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It came with many benefits. It made it easier to transact, faster to transact. So it solved for a lot of problems. But the ways in which it became abstract in the course of history, through the course of history, it created certain problems. The particular form of abstraction that happened created problems, and we'll get there. Just wanted to put that idea in your head. So now we are done with the Industrial Revolution as well, or most of it at least. We are now in the first half of the 20th century. What's happening? Does anyone remember what happened in these years?
The World War. Two world wars.
2 world wars were fought. Anything else comes to mind, people?
The Great Depression.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Money
And I
printing.
think gold pegging is also.
Yeah, all of that is coming. All of that is coming. So in this period, there were 2 world wars. There was the Great Depression, which was like a terrible economic crisis that happened primarily in the US, but then it spread everywhere because that's what happens. And a result of that, but also just in parallel, there were a lot of bank failures and bank runs that were happening. So basically, money itself became tenuous. Economies were put under a lot of stress. Governments and nation states were put under a lot of stress. And they needed money to fight the wars. Countries needed money to fight wars. The honest way to raise that money is through taxation. You tell people that, hey, I want 20, 30, 40, 50% of whatever you're making. They hate you for it, but it is upfront and it is honest. The sly way to do it is through theft. You just print the money, but you have a gold standard. You have money where people can go to the bank, deposit their physical note or whatever digital ledger money that they have now. And in exchange, they can walk away with physical gold. And as long as you have that, you have a certain check on the system. You have a certain limit. You can cheat a little, you can cheat a little more and a little more, and eventually you have like a run or a failure. This is what it eventually led to. As long as you had convertibility of gold, of the backing and the abstraction. So naturally, governments got rid of the convertibility. It started with European countries. So you have the moment the First World War began, basically you have European countries suspending gold convertibility. And this, you can say, is early fiat money. This is purely now money that the government says you have to use, but there is no promise, no claim of backing it with gold or with silver or anything that is precious. It's just money that the government can create unlimited supply of at their will. And the word fiat, of course, it comes from some Greek word or something. It means by force. So fiat money is money that you're forced to use because your government is saying that you have to use it, not because it has any inherent value. But I find the analogy of drugs to be quite helpful when it comes to trying to understand what fiat money is to governments. And we'll dig a little more deeper into this later, but just to give you a sense of it, it is not good for you in the long run. In the short run, it will give you a high that will make you feel great. But once you get hooked onto it, once you use it a few times and you enjoy that high a few times, it gets really hard to stop doing it. And you'll see why I'm saying this eventually. But just keep this analogy in mind. Fiat money is like doing drugs. Now, what the US did, what Europe did was they just said, okay, we won't let you convert your money into gold anymore. So that was like outright theft. The US took it in stages. So firstly, there was an executive order passed in 1933. This was by Roosevelt, if I'm not wrong. And the US confiscated private gold. So private people, so individuals like me, like you, if you were living in the US back then, you were not allowed to own gold coins, gold bullion, or depository certificates of gold or anything like that. You had to deposit all of that to some Federal Reserve Bank agent, something. And in exchange, you had to accept dollars. And back then, the price of a dollar was pegged to gold such that if you gave $20.67, you get an ounce of gold. In this case, because you had to give up your gold, you gave up 1 ounce of gold and you would get like 20 something dollars in exchange. The US government insisted that this was still a gold standard, that the gold is still being, your dollars are still being backed by gold. We're just asking you to use dollars because we just want you to use dollars. Just trust us, guys. Like, we have reasons to do this. This is a copy of the executive order. You can quickly like scan through this. What I really like about this is this little sentence over here, to the like instruction to the postmaster or instruction from the postmaster. Please post in a conspicuous place. No one should miss the message. Everyone should get the message. So yeah, this was the executive order issued, and people had to go and deposit their money. Some people did not. Of course, there's always some people who are like, nah, no one's gonna come and check. We'll keep our money. And that was the smart thing to do. Because what happened almost immediately afterwards was next year, the Gold Reserve Act was passed. And the new price of gold was set at $35 per ounce. Now, dollars were no longer redeemable for gold. So even when the first executive order was passed, before that, dollars were redeemable for gold. After that, they were not. And with the new amount, still not redeemable, but the government insists that, hey, the price of 1 ounce of gold is $35. But what this means is, you deposit an ounce of gold to the government today, you get $20 roughly from the government. Next year, you go back to the government and you say, take the $20, can I get my ounce of gold back? The government is like, no, there is no redeemability, but also the price of 1 ounce of gold is not $20 now, it's $35. So they just stole all that purchasing power by force from their citizens. And this is not the first time they'll do it. This won't be the last time they'll do it either. So it's still technically a gold standard because the government insists that it's a gold standard, but there is no convertibility. And they took good advantage of it. Now, this kept going on. European countries are doing their printing. The US is doing its own printing. World War II has ended. What's up? What's this picture that I'm showing you on the screen? Anyone wants to guess?
It's all stacks of cash, which are probably worth very little.
That's correct. It's children playing with bundles of cash. It's German marks. So Germany, infamously Weimar Republic back then, had hyperinflation. And yeah, so gold standard was already broken in 1914. You had multiple currencies. You had the franc, you had the German marks, you had the Austrian corona, you had the Hungarian something. Like you had multiple currencies floating. All of them were inflating. German mark hyperinflated because they did printing to the extreme. And what that meant was there was chaos. When you have a lot of inflation in currency and you have multiple currencies floating, the exchange rate keeps changing, which means trade becomes difficult. You need stability, and this is something I told I would come back to later. When you want trade to happen, and especially want trade at a global level to happen, you need money to retain its value. You need stability in pricing because there is a lag always in the time when you start looking for something, the time where you find something, the time where you negotiate the price of it, the time where you finalize an agreement, the time where it finally gets delivered to you. Like there is a lot of time lag between those things happen. But if you're negotiating all of that in a world where the price of money itself is changing rapidly, where what you can buy with money is changing rapidly, it just becomes much harder to do trade. So it creates a lot of chaos. It makes it difficult to do things. And Europe and Japan, of course, were in ruins by the end of the World War II. But the US was largely unharmed because the war did not happen in like the US, it happened in Europe. The US lost a few people for sure, but it also gained a lot from the war. It was selling supplies, it was selling food, it was selling clothes, it was definitely selling a lot of weapons. So the US was 45% of the world's GDP. It was greatest financial power, greatest military power. It held 70% of the world's gold reserves. A lot of it were its own gold. A lot of it was gold from before. A lot of it was gold that it earned during the war. So in exchange for all the things it supplied, it would only accept gold. Smart move. But also a lot of it was gold deposit to the US by either nation states or corporations or rich individuals or some kind of institution that wanted to move their gold away from war-torn Europe. So they wanted to store it in a safe place while the war was going on. So US already was sitting on 70% of the world's gold reserves. This is from Loki, the show that the US basically is telling the world that you look like you're in desperate need of leadership. And so it decided to provide some. Bretton Woods Monetary Conference, or the Bretton Woods Agreement, was reached there in 1944. Does anyone know what this was? Sanjeev sir, you've turned on your camera. I'm guessing you want
No,
to.
I was
Acha, just like that.
basically this is that the dollar was made an international. The whole transaction has to be done in dollars. That was the
Yeah. So the US stepped in, and US was like, okay, you guys need a standard currency for trading, and you need something stable. So what we'll do is we have a peg to the dollar at $35 per ounce of gold, right? We will keep that peg. You can peg your currency to the dollar. The dollar is pegged to gold. So indirectly, your currency will be pegged to gold as well. And all of you can now use the dollar for trade. And whenever you want gold back, you just give us dollars and we will give you the gold back based on this $35 per ounce rate. It's perfect. We've solved the problem for all of you. You now have a stable currency that you can use for trade. because you guys have tried multiple times. So in 1914, when they abolished the gold standard, all these European countries, many of them tried to re-establish it, but they failed because fiat money is like a drug. Once you get used to it, it's very hard to get rid of it. So they would keep failing, keep trying, keep failing, keep trying, and eventually they were like, okay, we give up, we'll accept your deal. And the US sweetened the deal. Like there was a Marshall Plan. Marshall was the Secretary of State back then, and they agreed to spend a lot of money in rebuilding Europe and rebuilding Japan. So they sweetened the deal for countries, so they have some short-term incentive for agreeing to the plan. So now again, the world is on a gold standard, and now this is even more indirect. The only country directly pegged to gold was the US dollar, and all other countries just sort of like decided that, okay, my 5 pounds are going to be $1 or 20 francs are going to be $1 or whatever that they decided with. There were many problems there. We don't have to go into it now, but there were also problems with the US dollar because the US kept printing after the Bretton Woods Agreement. It kept printing because there were wars to be fought always. There's the Cold War, there's the Vietnam War. There's always some domestic spending to be done to build this, to do that, some welfare this, some welfare that. So there's always a good reason to print money. If you have the power to print money, you will find an excuse to print money. If you have drugs at your disposal, you will find an excuse to do drugs. By the 1960s, especially the second half of the 1960s, it became obvious to countries that the US is printing dollars because there's just so many dollars circulating in the system, and there was no way at $35 per ounce of gold that there could have been that much gold with the US. So France began the charge by starting to demand gold in exchange for dollars. So this picture is that of a ship that France sent to US to get its gold back. It sent airplanes, it sent ships. It was just like, take your dollars, give us gold. And eventually other countries started doing that as well. Switzerland, UK, Germany, Netherlands, basically all countries that were on that Bretton Woods Agreement, including India, by the way. India was part of the agreement, even though India did not get the gold back. But India participated in the agreement pre-independence in 1944. These countries started getting their gold back. What's the problem with that? The problem is that the US did not have as much gold as they had printed dollars, which led to this. I want you guys to watch this clip and tell me what you think of it. I hope this loads.
Digvijay, we're not able to hear the audio, or is it just me?
There's no audio, yeah?
No, we can only see the subtitle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sad. But ठीक है, subtitle दिख रहा है. We'll have to figure out some presentation thing for audio. Yeah, we'll have to figure something out. ठीक है, we'll continue for now.
Just to confirm, didn't France do this again a couple of weeks ago?
Yes, they did.
They asked for their gold again, right?
Yeah.
Not
Not
just
only France. Even
A lot
India
of other
got it back.
countries, yeah.
In last 3 years, India has got almost 60% of their gold back.
Yeah.
yeah. History maybe doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right? It's happening again. We'll get to that as well.
The petrodollar this thing was because of this only.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're back. You're seeing my screen, right?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm able to see.
Okay. All right. I mean, I've already got into the slide, but before we do that, what are your like takeaways from this talk, from this little like address to the nation?
Should have never happened.
What never happened, Sandeep?
It should have never happened.
It should have never happened.
Well, but this led to that the Nixon and this thing going for petro dollar deal signed with all petro countries.
Yeah.
To make the dollar relevant. You know?
Eventually, yeah, that's what they needed to do to keep the dollar relevant.
Yes.
There's a few things that stand out to me. He starts by saying that they need to protect the dollar against the speculators.
Correct.
The framing of it is quite interesting. It's the speculators that are at fault here, not the US. The US promised that you can exchange $35 for 1 ounce. And when countries actually started to ask US to fulfill that promise, it's the countries that are now becoming speculators, the evil people who are like doing the wrong thing against the dollar, and the dollar needs to be protected. It reminds me a lot about when the RBI these days talks about the INR exchange rate and how like speculators are driving it down. Second thing that stands out is suspend temporarily the convertibility of dollar into gold. This was 1971. The dollar and no other currency for that matter has been convertible for gold since. So the temporary thing is doing a lot of hard, like heavy lifting in this case. It's been a long temporary suspension. And third thing is your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. This we are going to thoroughly debunk in the next few slides. But 1971 was a pivotal moment. Until 1971, there was some check on governments. Either institutions or other countries could go to whatever government is issuing the money and ask for gold in return. After 1971, it's been jungle raj, it's been crazy. You can print as much as you want. There is no one stopping you. There is nothing that can stop you. There are consequences. When you print money, you increase the supply of money, so there will be inflation, CPI inflation, experienced inflation, whatever. But it heralded the era of what is called the fiat standard. So fiat money is the only kind of money that people use today, primarily, and it's the beginning of the end. So it started in 1971. Why am I so sure that it is going to end? Anyone wants to guess?
What is going to end? I'm so sorry, I had not understood.
The fiat standard, the kind of money that we have today, dollars, rupees, euros, backed by nothing. I'm already declaring that it is
The
going
first, in the beginning of the session, you put one sentence, okay, this is going to be the underlying those, so that is the one.
Yeah, it's the same. This is the guy. This is the man, Herbert Stein, the economist. If something
Yes.
cannot go on forever, it will stop.
Yes.
So it has to stop. That's how I know.
Yeah.
Why can't it go on forever? The tenure of any kind of money that we've used, either directly or as an abstraction, but let's talk about abstractions now. These tenures tend to like die because of two primary reasons, and they're both connected, but we won't get into the relation now because that leads to debates. But one is that the dominance of the empire that issues that money, they lose dominance over time for whatever reason, can be argued again, and that they inflate the money away. So when they are in a dominant position, they want to steal, they want to do all sort of shenanigans. So they lose their monetary sort of value over time. So this is Roman coins. This is a history of Roman coins. They started off with a 97% purity silver coin. By the time the Roman Empire collapsed, they were down to 3%. They just flipped the other way. A lot of people argue that the collapse of empires is strongly connected to the devaluation of money itself, that it's not just a correlation, that there is some causation here. I see the arguments, I think they make sense, but again, I'm not going to get into it here. I just wanted to plant that idea in your head and you can explore it by yourself. It's not just, it's very consequential to the lifespan, to the half-life of an empire, a kingdom, a nation state, what they do with their money. You look at what monies have been acting as reserve currencies. You start with Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, France, Britain, and now the US. Like, it's about 100 years you realize that each of them last before they concede power to someone else. And the US has been sort of the dominant currency since like the end of the First World War, about like 1920. So it's been around for like 100+ years already. We'll see how long it can last. We'll go back to the takeaways of last session because there's something to be built from here. We talk about inflation being increasing money supply, about the debasement of money, but you're going to keep hearing inflation being used in a different way, in the CPI inflation sort of way. So I wanted to give you a framework in which you can think about inflation, and then we'll take it forward from there. There are three kinds of inflation. There is monetary inflation, there is experienced inflation, and then there is CPI inflation. Monetary inflation, as we've discussed before, is the rate at which you're being stolen from. So the rate at which money supply is being increased. There are different measures of it. There's M1, M2, M3. We don't have to get into the technicalities of it. M2 is the most commonly used one, and again, there are good reasons for it. But the point is basically the amount or the quantity of money being increased, that is monetary inflation, and that is the rate at which whatever money you have is losing its share in the total supply. Then there is experienced inflation. This is the rate of loss in your purchasing power, and it's not the same as monetary inflation because of technological advancements. So technological advancements make things cheaper, and hence experienced inflation tends to be lower than monetary inflation. And you can measure experienced inflation by looking at your own like consumption basket, like the things that you do, the things that you consume, and you can keep track of it. Some people do that, some people go through the effort, but there are also some like simple proxies that you can look at. So one very famous one is the Big Mac index. What it tracks is the price of one Big Mac, so at McDonald's, over years. And the reason why it's a very good index is that there are so many inputs that go into running that business that produces that final Big Mac. So if you look at the raw ingredients themselves, there's bread, there's cheese, there's veggies, there's meat, there's a lot of like different kinds of products that go in, but also there is the rent of the place that is being run. There are salaries being paid to employees, there's electricity costs, there's transportation costs, there's all kinds of costs that somehow get factored into that one single Big Mac, which is why it's a simple index to keep track of. It is not a government sponsored index. It is a real price out there in the world, and it can help you get a sense of how much prices are actually increasing. But what government wants you to believe is that prices are increasing at the rate of CPI inflation, which is a lie told by governments. CPI inflation, you will realize, is typically lower than, of course, it's lower than monetary inflation, but it's also lower than experienced inflation. So government has an incentive to underreport inflation. Does anyone want to sort of venture a guess or explain how does the government do that? How does it underreport inflation? There's many ways it does that, but
Maybe by including the wrong items in the basket.
Exactly.
Maybe something like a radio or something which no one uses as of now.
there is definitely a lot of like playing around that happens with the basket of it.
It's
So
in
you
their
can-
it's in their benefit to underreport inflation.
Correct. Most people are not keeping track of their experienced inflation day to day. So they just accept the CPI number as like, yeah, this is what inflation must be. So it's like optically it works for them. And because the CPI inflation number is used as a corrector for everything else, like everything else is adjusted basis of inflation. So when the adjustment is lower, then everything else looks better, the growth looks better and everything. So there's a lot of incentives there for sure. One special way in which the CPI inflation number, the basket way, I'll give you an example, is what the way in which it works is that they take a survey of many people and they ask them, okay, what are you spending money on? Let's say I'm living in a flat, right? I have a room, I have a flat that I live in. How inflation should actually be calculated is it should take a fixed baskets of goods, roughly speaking. Of course, there are adjustments that need to be made based on changing technology and everything. But it should, let's say if you're looking at the rent aspect of inflation, let's say I live in a 1,000 square feet flat. So it should look at a 1,000 square feet flat in the same locality, in the same area, and then track its price over the years. How much rent am I having to pay for the same flat over the years or a similar flat over the years? And that should be the input to CPI inflation. But the way in which it is actually done is it asks people for how much they are paying for rent. Now, rent is increasing rapidly. Like not all things increase or decrease in price at the same rate. Rent is one of those things that increases a lot, or the cost of buying a house increases a lot. The cost of eating out increases a lot. So people adjust their own spending patterns based on the price of things in the real economy. So as let's say rent gets expensive, I move from a 1,000 square foot flat to an 800 square foot flat to a 500 square foot flat over the years. So my rent is not increasing. I am making sure that my rent is not increasing. In fact, my rent might decrease even because I keep reducing the size of my house. And that gets factored into CPI inflation. CPI inflation doesn't keep track of the 1,000 square foot house over 10 years or 15 years or whatever. It is keeping track of what I am consuming, which is being influenced by the price itself. So it's inherently rigged to underreport because people shift their consumption based on increasing prices. And to just give you sort of a monetary proof of how this works, this is US M2 money supply inflation, so monetary inflation, starting from like roughly 1971 until today. And if you do the CAGR of it, like a compounded annual growth in the money supply, it's roughly 6.6% in the US. If you look at their experienced inflation, so you look at the Big Mac index here, the Big Mac index has gone up by 173% from like 1986 to now, to like 2012 this chart is, and then here it is from 2012 to 2023 something. I did the math again for these numbers and it came out to be roughly 3.7, 3.8%. So the experienced inflation was lower than monetary inflation because technology made it cheaper. But both these graphs also show you the CPI inflation. So the CPI inflation in both cases underreported the actual experienced inflation, the Big Mac index inflation, and by how much. So again, I found some data and I did the math and it came out to be 2.7% roughly over a long enough time horizon. So now you have monetary inflation greater than experienced inflation greater than CPI inflation. And you'll find that the same trend is true for all countries. The exact numbers may vary and it would depend on what exact time frames you choose, but roughly this trend holds. And interesting.
I have one question. So
Yes.
whatever you're saying, the experience inflation, CPI inflation. So now total, what is the inflation? Is all the combination of three, additional of three?
No, they are different ways of understanding what inflation is.
Okay.
One way to understand inflation is the rate at which the government is increasing the money supply and hence stealing from you.
Okay.
The other way to understand inflation is the rate at which prices of things that you want to buy are increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And another way that the government tells you should understand inflation is the CPI number. Now, the argument is that if you have hard money, if you have money that cannot be printed away, everything would get cheaper. So the monetary inflation number gives you a sense of how much cheaper things would get if the government was not printing money. And the experienced inflation number gives you a sense of how expensive things are instead getting. So things are getting expensive by 3.8% every year, although they should get cheaper by 6.6% every year. That is the way I understand it. And the 2.7% CPI inflation is the lie the government wants you to believe. This, I hope people can understand why it's not to be trusted.
So what you are trying to say is government is hiding the information and saying there is no much inflation.
Yeah.
That's true.
And it's not just the Indian government, like this is a global
Yeah.
phenomenon.
And basically any government, I mean.
Yeah. If you look at this chart, this right chart, this is again for the US. It's just easier to find data for the US. Their CPI index, so this is not the inflation number, it's the basket price itself, like priced in dollars. It stayed flat for so long, more or less. Like there were small peaks during the wars when the money printing increased and everything, but it stayed flat mostly until the money printing started really, and then it's just been going vertical. So you see the effect of 1971 playing out when you just look at these graphs for long enough, and I'll show a bunch of more graphs later. So again, the summary of these three is that in the US, what you saw was monetary inflation greater than experienced inflation greater than CPI inflation. And the number of CPI inflation is what the government wants you to believe, which is not a real number. But also inflation is not a scalar. As I mentioned, the price of everything is changing at a different rate. Some things are getting expensive more quickly, some things are getting expensive a little more slowly, some things are actually getting cheaper, like TVs, mobile phones. If you look at the same quality TV, same size, same display, same pixels, whatever, you will realize that they're actually getting cheaper because technology has penetrated the production of these things to a lot greater extent compared to those on the top. When you come to hospital services, and this is for the US, so hospital is especially high, but in general, college, hospital, child care, medical care, housing, these are either scarce or involve real humans in the process, which is why they've not been scaled to the same extent. What this also means is that it's not just true for price of things you consume, it's also true for asset prices. If you look at data again, you have the US money supply mapped in black, and you have the S&P 500 mapped in yellow, sort of orange. And it's never exactly the same, but it tracks very closely. So as money supply increases, the value of the S&P 500 more or less follows closely. What does that mean? It means that if you held cash, you lost most of your purchasing power. Like you start here almost close to zero, and then the supply has increased so much, so you're just sitting with pennies. But if you held the S&P 500 instead, you preserve your share of the economy, roughly speaking. Like it's not absolute, but you get to preserve a decent chunk of your share of the economy. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It's also true for India. If you compare India's M2 money supply versus the Nifty 50, again, India's money M2 supply is like the purple line, the Nifty 50 here is the blue line, and it's not 100% track, but the CAGRs are close. They're roughly matching, and depending on times, it goes up and down. And you have a similar trend. If you had cash lying around, that became worthless. But if you had an hard asset, like the Nifty 50, it kept its share of the economy. It sort of held up in purchasing power. Similar
One question, Digvijay. Sorry to interrupt. Do
No,
you
no,
have
no.
any data that if someone is holding the cash or someone is invested in the FD or something, do you have that data? If someone instead of investing in the Nifty 50, someone had only held the cash and someone is done only the FD. If you show or if you add that in the next slide or in the coming days, that will be much better to explain to us.
I don't have that in the exact form that you're asking, but I have some form of it. But also what you can do
At
is,
least do you have the number? Like if instead of investing in the Nifty 50, if someone held in the cash or FD, what be the returns? Of course, it is will be the negative, but how much it will be negative?
So you can, like, I can also do the math very quickly. So it's basically losing
Mhm.
value at
Mhm.
whatever rate the money supply is increasing, right? So
Okay.
12.8% every year, you're losing roughly value.
Okay.
And this
So
is a
every year
compounded.
Okay. Okay. So I
Yeah.
have to do the reverse compounding.
Yeah, it works in the reverse way. In nominal terms, it's the same, but in like in the money supply
No,
terms,
it will be like if we say 12.8, if someone is having 1 lakh rupees in the year 1992, then it is 12.8% minus means is almost zero now, or even in
precisely.
negative. If you say 12.8% compounding, negative compounding, it will be a minus like 1 lakh or 2 lakh, I think
No,
so.
it can never go in negative terms, I think,
Yeah,
mathematically,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yes,
It's
it
almost
can be
zero, I can say.
almost close to zero. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what happened. That's why 1 lakh in 1992 was worth like a lot more.
Yes.
You could buy a lot more. The value of that money has been cut so many times that today you can buy a
No,
lot less.
within 12.8% means within 7 years, that value goes to zero. And we are
It
talking about
doesn't go
20
to
to
zero.
25 years.
It just gets. So the rule is that, right? The law of 72 or something,
Mm-hmm.
that you divide it by like 72 by 12. So it's like what, like 5 point something, like maybe six, little less than 6. So in roughly 6 years, half of your purchasing power is gone. And this keeps happening every 6 years. So how many 6-year multiples have we had since 1992? It's been 34 years, roughly
34 years.
6 years,
34 years.
roughly 34 years. So like 6 blocks of 6 years we've had. So it's 1 by 2 to the power 6. So it's 1 by 64. So 1/64th the share of the economy if you just held cash.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. And you see a similar trend with gold. So coming back to like preserving purchasing power is that if you just held gold instead, and this is a chart starting from like 1960 or something, money supply kept increasing, but gold also roughly held its purchasing power. So the aha moment for investors, for people in general, was that hard assets preserve your share of the economy over time. And hard assets are basically, like, in simple words, they are scarce and they are desirable. So gold, silver to an extent, top performing equities, so hence the indexes which automatically compile the top performing equities of that time, prime real estate, famous pieces of art, rare bottles of wines. There's many such things that fall into, like, collectible items that fall into these like hard assets, scarce and desirable, and they tend to hold your share of the economy or your purchasing power over time. The sad part is that you have to be an investor to be able to protect yourself now. So every time the government is printing money, value of hard assets is going up and the value of cash is going down in nominal terms. And to be able to be on the good side of it, you have to be invested in the right things. Now, everyone has to become an investor to preserve their purchasing power. There was a time when gold was used as money, when you can just use gold. You get gold as a salary, you use gold for transactions, and whatever is left, you just keep it with yourself. And 5 years, 10 years, 15 years later, when you need it, you take it out from under your mattress, and it buys you just as much, if not more, in the world. But you can't do that with rupees or with dollars. They keep losing purchasing power. So you have this form of trickle up economics now, because who owns most of the hard assets in the world? It's the rich. It's concentrated. Wealth is concentrated. So whenever the government prints money, whoever is holding cash is losing out. Whoever is holding assets is winning. So what is happening is this money printing, this inflation, is becoming a transfer of wealth from whoever has cash to whoever has assets, from the poor to the rich. And the problem with that, I mean, we can look at charts, but the problem with that is you're stuck in a situation where the poor need the government to print money because it's been doing it for so long that the poor are now dependent on government subsidies, on welfare programs, to be able to conduct their lives, to live like basic, to say decent lives feels like an insult to them. but they need governments to keep printing so that they can conduct their basic lives. But this printing eventually finds its way into asset prices and then increases the wealth of the rich and increases inequality. So you're stuck in this situation, again, coming back to the drug analogy, that you need the drug because you're addicted to it. If you don't take it, you're going to have very strong withdrawal symptoms. So the incentive always is to take it one more time. And you take it then, and for a little while you feel better, but eventually you will need it again because the negative effects of the drug wearing off start to come again. So you're stuck in this loop where the governments don't even have to convince you to print money now. People want the governments to print money, but it is not benefiting the people in the long run. In the long run, it is only exacerbating inflation, the inequality. And if you don't believe me, there's a bunch of charts you can find. This is all based on the US, but there's also some based on like European countries. I'm sure you can find it based on India if you look hard enough. It's a very good site, WTF-happened-in-1971.com. I'll quickly walk you through some of them. So this is about the percentile of the economy. So bottom 20, medium, 95 percentile. Until 1971, roughly, everyone's like income was increasing. And then after that, real income, so adjusted for CPI inflation. If you adjust for real inflation, everything just gets worse, by the way. But adjusted for CPI inflation. And then after that, the income of top families just has been blowing up, while median and lower families has been stagnant. More proof. This is Gini ratio. It's a very famous measure of inequality. So inequality was going down until about 1970, 1971, and since then it's been shooting up. Income concentration at the top has risen. So the top 1%, top 0.5% of the economy, how much of the income was concentrated with them? You see that it was falling until a certain point, until about 1971, and then since then it's been rising again. This is again a chart of like your wages, median weekly earnings of full-time workers, average real wage, like there's a bunch of different things, but this is important. These two are the important ones, the brown line here and the blue line here. This is real GDP per capita. So this is GDP per capita adjusted for CPI inflation. So this is going up. GDP per capita is going up, but the people, the ordinary people, are not benefiting from it since about 1971. All of that benefit is being captured by the top 1.5 whatever percent. It's not flowing to common people because the theft. Again, productivity is going up. The orange line is going up. We are becoming more productive. We are producing more with the same input. But your wages, your pay is not really going up in proportion, which was not the case until about 1971 again. Why is it just coincidence that no matter what metric you take, and all of this data, if you look at the sources, Economic Policy Institute, Bureau of Labor Statistics, like these are all government sources. If you find alternative sources that are looking for like actual inflation or questioning the data collection methods, whatever you will find will be much worse than this. But even according to government sources, 1971 was an inflection point. Again, another sort of metric. Bottom 90% of earners, how much of like growth do they see in their income versus the top 1% of earners? And until 1971, approximately, their bottom 90% were actually getting richer. They were earning more and more and more and more. And since then, they've been flat, if not a little down. Again, the worst part, as I said, is you're stuck in this cycle. The government is printing to spend on welfare schemes. That money eventually trickles up to asset prices. So the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. And to fix that, the government prints more money on welfare schemes. And you just keep cycling through and you just keep increasing inequality. The system is rigged. We are stuck in a catch-22. Who's coming to save us? This is for you. Who's coming to save us?
Satoshi.
I like that answer. Satoshi will eventually make an experience in this series at some point. Next session. This session, Satoshi hasn't made an entrance yet. It's our old friend. It's our old friend. If something cannot go on forever, it will stop. This cannot go on forever. Why can't it go on forever? If you look at debt to GDP of countries, debt to GDP is a metric most people are familiar with. How much the government has borrowed divided by the total size of the economy's output. This is for the US again, tracking over like since 1790, like multiple centuries, honestly. Every time you see there's like a war or a Great Depression or some big crisis, like debt to GDP shoots up, like it shot up about 100%, close to World War II, after World War II. And then it was like brought back down. And then again, since around 1970s, it's like shot up. There was an attempt to bring it down, but it's been going vertical since. This is a slightly old chart. A newer chart will show that it's breached the 120% mark. And this is the Federal Reserve data. This is on their official website, not cooking anything up. None of the data I've shared with you is like from alternative sources, even though I would love to share that data instead. I've shared only official data with you. And they always underestimate the evil. They always have an incentive to make things seem better than they are. And in spite of that, this is how bad things are. And this is 120% plus of GDP, which is the wrong metric. By the way, this is true for basically all countries. You're at some like exorbitantly high percentage of GDP when it comes to your deficit. But what you should be tracking is not debt to GDP. If you go to the previous slide quickly, what you should be tracking is debt as a relative of interest payments or revenue receipts. Because when you're a government and you're taking on debt, how you pay back the debt is by the revenue that you get, which is mostly through like taxation and through some other sources, right? So debt to GDP is again a rigged metric. It's a metric that makes it seem smaller than it actually is, the problem. The relevant metric is debt to revenue. How much debt I have versus how much income I have. And that for the US in 2025 was 6.5, which means it is 6.5 years of 100% of the income of the government going into paying back the debt. And that is not possible. Why is that not possible? In fact, right now, every year they even add more debt. So 2025, again, they added 1.8 trillion, which is roughly like 34% of the money that they are making, they're just adding in as more debt. So I just made it as a real example for you. If you're a person and making 1 lakhs a year, you're making 12 lakhs a year, you have an outstanding loan of 78 lakhs, not to buy an asset, not to buy a home, just to meet your daily expenses because you like to spend a lot. 6.5 years of your income. And every year you add about 4 lakhs more of loan because you're used to spending 34% more than what you earn every year. Why would anyone lend to you? Eventually, no one will want to lend to you. Clearly, you cannot pay back the money. So why does anyone lend to the government? Anyone knows who this guy is?
J. Paul.
Jerome Powell, the former chair of the Federal Reserve in the US. The government has a money printer. If you as a person had a money printer, you would spend as much as you like. That's what the government does. So this is for the US government again. Their receipts were close to 5 trillion. Their spending was close to 7 trillion. Their deficit was 1.8 trillion roughly. And this is all the things that they spend on. Social security, written into law. Healthcare, Medicaid, Medicare, written into law. Net interest on debt, of course you have to pay the interest on the debt you have taken. Sort of written into law, you can't default. Medicare, again, written into law. Defense, if you don't spend on defense, like, I mean, actually, it can be argued that the US can cut defense expenditure, but it won't because that's the whole power game that it is in, and it is fighting more and more wars now. So there's just like everything, every aspect of it, it is really hard to cut down or legally not allowed to cut down. Deficits are now structurally built into the system. It's not a matter of Republicans or Democrats in power. It's not a matter of Congress or BJP in power. No matter who is in power, no matter which country you go to. There are a couple of exceptions like Switzerland, but basically in every other country, deficits are structural and most of the big expenses are mandated. So why can't they cut down? It's because like they tried. Elon Musk tried. They started the Department of Government Efficiency. He said he would cut down 2 trillion from the deficit. He managed to cut down a few millions. He was off by at least 10,000 times from his target. So it's incredibly hard politically. It's very hard to go to people and say that, hey, this thing that we've been giving you all these years, we won't give it to you anymore. Because your rival will come in and he will say that, hey, don't vote for this guy, vote for me. I will still give it to you. And because it's like a drug, you will take it. You will vote for the guy who will give you your drug. You will not vote for the guy who will give you withdrawal symptoms. And if you try to cut it now, because it is like a drug, you will have the withdrawal symptoms. You will have an economic collapse. The system is now based on debt. It is bloated. If you take all that extra money printing away, you will have a lot of the income shrink. You will have the economy shrink. You will probably enter a depression. Not probably, very likely enter a depression. And your tax revenues will shrink, which means you will have to cut down deficits even more. But you've already borrowed the money. You already have to pay the interest. You already have promised the social security and the this and the that. So you have to keep cutting and cutting, and it's going to be really, really hard. So no one wants to do that work. Basically, yeah, withdrawal symptoms. And now you're in a situation where roughly half of the world is in double digits already. There are many countries that have entered the triple digits race for inflation. You can call them hyperinflation at this point. And all roads are leading to that. It's a matter of time. Governments, if they have the power to inflate, it is a matter of time before they eventually find the excuses to inflate. Kicking the can down the road is always easier for them, and they will keep doing it. They will keep postponing the responsibility to take care of this problem. Is there a solution? That is the point of this whole session, this series of sessions, that there is a solution to this problem. I know you've come in for something else. You've come in for the money aspect of it, and I'll get to that. I mean, we've already exceeded session, so like 2 more minutes. But this is Buckminster Fuller. He was a very famous American architect. He said, in this cosmically uniform common energy value system for all humanity, costing will be expressed in kilowatt hours, watt seconds of work. So in terms of energy. And these uniform energy valuations will replace all the world's manipulatable monetary systems. This he wrote in his book in 1981, published in 1981, 10 years after the gold standard was abolished. There's another even better solution proposed by this guy. I don't know if you've heard of him, but I want to play this video.
It's not audible.
Yeah, same problem as last time. You'll have to see the screen. Is that fine? Is that fine?
Yeah,
Sure,
it's
sure,
okay.
sure.
By some sly or roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop. This is Frederick August von Hayek. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist. And he's a very practical man, obviously. He understands that the governments are not going to give up money easily, and we as people can't take it violently from their hands. That's also not easy. So we'll have to be sly about it, some roundabout way. So, what is money then? It's a revolution masquerading as a get rich quick scheme. The next session is going to be about this revolution. If you have any questions, I'll take it now, and then we'll wrap the session up.
My question, can you please share this PPT? It is a good thing.
Sure, sure. At the end of every session, we share the PPT with everyone who's registered. I think you'll get an email.
Digvijay, do you also have the group QR code to share?
Yes, I have everything. So
Yeah.
I'll go through the motions. Firstly, what I do, I didn't introduce myself at the start. So I'm Digvijay, and I currently run a Bitcoin podcast education sort of channel, and I'm on multiple platforms. You can follow me everywhere and anywhere, and I post stuff. GetBit is the organization I'm collaborating with for this series. I've been a customer for close to 3 years now. I was a customer for 2 years before I became an affiliate. So you can buy Bitcoin at GetBit. We are not there yet. We get there in the next session about Bitcoin. And then the session after that, the fourth session, is going to be like a practicalities of it. So next session is going to be about like what Bitcoin is, and then addressing a lot of your questions and concerns. And the fourth session is going to be like, okay, different ways to buy Bitcoin, legal implications, taxation, how to store it, how to keep it safely, will it get hacked, this, that, all of that, So once we get there, this will become more relevant. So you can buy using my code and you get 30% off on platform fees for the first 3 months. And then I also get some commission. So it's like a very transparent system, but it's beneficial to both. This is the link to the WhatsApp community that we have, Bitcoin Wale. You can join the group. Last session, I think almost everyone who attended is already in the group. So we are also active there. Ayush has posted the link in the chat as well. And Ayush is also going to float a feedback form. So let me stop sharing. What's important about the feedback form is because Bitcoin is a topic where a lot of people have different sorts of concerns about it. I want to anchor that session. So the first session was a lot more involvement from you. This session was a lot more talking from me. The next session is going to be a lot more questions from you, because the main hurdle to Bitcoin adoption is whatever unique problems you have. Now, if you want your questions to be higher on the priority list of what we address, because there's a limited time, of course, when Ayush floats the feedback form, I want you to fill the feedback form, and there's a section in the feedback form where you can just add comments, like type in whatever you want. In that section, you can talk about what you want addressed in the next session. I will plan for it. I will try to make whatever slides I make for it, but especially I will put time aside for those questions to be addressed first. So this is incentive for you to fill the feedback form. So next session, we'll focus on your problems. Of course, if you attend and if you haven't filled, if there is time left, we will still answer your questions. But if you want the priority, you fill the feedback form. And then in the fourth session, we'll give you a practical guide on how to get about this whole like Bitcoin buying and storing business. Any more questions, comments that you have before we wrap this up? This session was a lot more me talking. I don't like sessions of this kind personally, but I had a lot of ground to cover today. I even told Ayush we might not be able to do it in one session, might take 2, but we managed in 1. But next session is going to be about your questions, and it's going to be a lot of debating, because it's not easy to put to rest concerns that people have, is what I've realized. So I don't mind. We'll get into discussions and debates. If we have nothing, we'll wrap this up. What say, Ayush?
Yeah, I don't think people have questions, and if they do, they can always like use the group. But Yeah, the chat is on if you want to ask any questions.
Cool, awesome. I'll see you next week then. The thing about next week is also that because we're not covering any of the old stuff, we'll just be talking about like Bitcoin itself. If you have friends who wanted to learn about Bitcoin, who missed these first couple of sessions, next session is going to be like a deep dive into Bitcoin itself. So you can have them join the session. And it'll just be like a Bitcoin 101 session proper. Cool? All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Darpan. See you.